All right, let's get right into it. Today we're going to talk about a really powerful new way of looking at the human mind. It's called the Virtual Ego Framework, and it comes from some pretty incredible work by Allan Christopher Beckingham, who spent 37 years in the Canadian Armed Forces. He developed this model to really understand trauma, healing, and, well, the very idea of who we are.
So, let's kick things off with a question, and I'm guessing a lot of you can relate to this. Have you ever felt like you're just stuck, caught in a loop where you find yourself repeating the same painful patterns, the same mistakes over and over again? Well, that exact feeling of being psychologically stuck is the big problem we're going to unpack today.
To really get how we get stuck, we've got to start by changing how we think about the self. And this framework gives us this amazing new metaphor. What if your ego, your sense of I, isn't some fixed, solid thing you're born with? What if it's actually more like software? Yeah, so get this. The VEF calls the ego a virtual machine, a VM. Just think about the operating system on your computer. It runs on the physical hardware, right? But it's not the hardware itself. The VEF says our ego is like that. It's a program running on the hardware of our brain. And its main job? It's not to be the real you. Its main job is to create a story, a coherent narrative that makes sense of your reality from one second to the next.
And this, right here, is the game changer. The old way of thinking is that your ego is you. It's fixed, it's permanent, you are your story. But the virtual ego framework just flips that completely on its head. It says, no, the ego is just the software, and you're the programmer. You're not just a character in the story, you are the one who gets to write it. And even better, you get to rewrite it.
So how does this code get written in the first place? Well, the framework breaks it down into these three basic layers. First, you've got the hardware. That's your brain, your basic neurobiology, the stuff you get from your genetics. Then you have firmware. Think of this like the deep-down foundational code that gets installed when you're a little kid. It's all your core rules about safety, about trust. And on top of all that, you have the software. This is your story of me, and it's getting updated constantly, every single day by all of your life experiences.
Okay, so if the ego is software, then like any software, it can get bugs. It can have glitches. And the VEF has a very specific name for the kind of bug that keeps us stuck in those painful repeating loops we were talking about. It's called the Zenotrap. But why? Why would our own mind keep us trapped in something painful? Well, this quote really gets to the absolute heart of it. Remember, the ego's #1 job is to make a story that makes sense. So when it's faced with something awful and chaotic, like a trauma that has no meaning, it has a choice. It can live in that terrifying, meaningless chaos, or it can create a painful story that's at least predictable. And almost every time, it chooses the painful certainty. It's a survival instinct, believe it or not.
And here's the crucial idea. A Zenotrap is when that bug basically becomes a feature. It's a recursive loop. Like a computer program that gets stuck on one line of code, repeating it forever and ever? The ego gets locked into replaying a painful memory or a negative belief because, even though it hurts, it provides an answer. It gives the pain a reason. It makes the pain make sense.
And this isn't just some abstract concept. We see these Zenotraps playing out in very real ways. PTSD flashbacks? That's a classic Zenotrap. The mind re-rendering a traumatic event over and over. The compulsive rituals and OCD? That's a loop. Having the same fight with your partner again and again? That's a Zenotrap. The brutal cycle of addiction? Yep, another one. It's all just the same buggy code running on repeat.
Okay, but here comes the really hopeful part. Because if we can get stuck in a bug, it also means we can debug the code. This framework doesn't just diagnose the problem, it gives us a clear path for breaking out of these cycles for good.
The whole process is called ego transcendence, and it's basically a two-step fix. Step 1, you have to disrupt the state. You've got to find a way to interrupt that program while it's running, to hit the escape key on that infinite loop. And only after you've created that pause can you move on to the second, all-important step, consciously reauthoring your story.
So how in the world do you interrupt the loop? Well, the research points to some really powerful tools. Things like meditation, or getting into a flow state, where you're just totally absorbed in a hobby, or experiencing a sense of awe, looking at a starry night or incredible art. Now, what do all of these have in common? They all temporarily quiet down the part of your brain that's responsible for that constant inner chatter about yourself. It's called the default mode network. And by quieting it down, you effectively hit pause on the Zenotrap.
But just hitting pause isn't enough, right? If your computer crashes, you don't just leave it off. you need to reboot it with better software. That's why the second step, reauthoring your story, is where the real, lasting change happens. This is all about writing new code.
And let's be super clear about what this means. This is not about forgetting the past or pretending bad things didn't happen. The goal is integration. It's about taking those painful events, those data points, and weaving them into a new, bigger story. A story that's actually about survival, about growth, about the meaning you found despite what happened. This is just such a powerful shift in perspective. It reframes the entire idea of therapy. It's no longer about finding what's wrong with you, what's broken or diseased. Instead, it becomes a process of debugging. You're not a patient with a pathology, you're a user actively working to improve your own operating system.
And really, that's what this all boils down to. This is the ultimate empowering takeaway of the virtual ego framework. It's all about agency. It's about realizing that you, yes, you, have the power to access and change your own programming. You are the system administrator of your own mind.
So, I want to leave you with this thought. This framework tells us that we are not just passive victims of whatever code was written for us in the past. We are the active authors of our lives, right now. So the real question isn't whether you can change. The real question is, if you have the power to write a new story for yourself, what will you write?